Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Beyond the breathtaking landscapes and rugged beauty of Texas lies a darker side. Texas Park. Rangers known for their courage share their unsettling encounters with the paranormal, the unexplained, and the truly terrifying in this video. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's dive into the darkness. Garrett Miles had been a park ranger long enough to know that the land tells stories. You don't need a voice, not really. The hills, the trees, the river, they carry history in the way the wind moves through them, in the way the shadows fall. At dusk, the Guadalupe River had always been his quiet companion, a place he respected, but he never imagined it could speak to him. Not like this. It began on an evening like any other. Garrett was finishing his rounds, walking the narrow dirt trail that hugged the river's edge where the trees grew thick and dark, their branches nodding overhead like gnarled fingers. The river's gentle murmur was a balm after a long day, the kind of sound that sinks into your skin and pulls the tight knots of stress loose. But that night, as the sky turned a deep ink blue and stars blinked awake, there was something else, a whisper, soft and low, carried on the breeze. It wasn't the rush of water or the rustle of leaves. It was something else, like breath or a name just out of reach. Garrett stopped and cocked his head. The whisper came again, closer this time, as if right beside him. Garrett! It wasn't a voice from the park or the wind. It was a voice only he could hear. He spun around, shining his flashlight into the shadows. Nothing. Just trees, thick and silent. His pulse quickened. He told himself it was the river playing tricks, that maybe fatigue was bending reality. Days passed, but the whispers didn't fade. If anything, they grew louder, more insistent. No one else heard them. He tested it, asking other rangers if they heard voices on the wind, if the river talked to them. They just laughed, brushing it off as stress or imagination. Garrett tried to ignore it, but the whispers gnawed at his mind like a slow poison. They pulled at him, especially near the river's bend where the old sycamore trees stood guard, their roots dipping into the water like ancient claws. One morning, after a restless night haunted by the voices, Garrett decided to follow them. He left the ranger station before dawn, taking only his flashlight, his worn leather journal, and a steady nerve. The whispers were faint then, threading through the mist that hovered low above the river. The trail led him downstream, past familiar spots, a collapsed beaver dam, a twisted oak stump, the old rope swing where kids once played, but then to a place Garrett barely recognized. The river narrowed sharply here, hemmed in by sheer limestone cliffs that rose like walls, jagged and unyielding. Vines crawled over the rock, swallowing patches of old graffiti and faded warnings carved long ago. And there, almost hidden by thick brush, was a small opening, a cave mouth, black and inviting. Garrett hesitated. The cave wasn't on any park map, never mentioned in reports. It looked like nature had tried to swallow it whole, leaving only a dark hole that whispered secrets no one wanted to hear. But the voices, soft, urgent, called him closer. They weren't angry, not yet. More like waiting. He checked his flashlight and stepped inside. The air was thick, damp and cold, smelling of earth and something old, like forgotten bones and rusted iron. His light beam skimmed over slick rock walls, tracing ancient markings, scratches, symbols, patterns that made no sense but felt important. Deeper in, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber, shaped like a hollow bowl beneath the earth. Garrett's breath caught, scattered across. The floor were bones piled in strange arrangements. Not animal bones, human. ancient, bleached white with time. They lay next to small piles of rocks arranged like altars, decorated with bits of charcoal, cracked pottery, and rusted metal trinkets. He knelt, running his fingers over a symbol carved into the stone altar, a circle crossed by lines, jagged, like lightning. A shiver ran down his spine. The whispers grew louder, swirling like a storm around him. Names, dozens of names, whispered one after another, pleading, warning. Garrett felt eyes watching from the darkness. He spun his flashlight beam toward the shadows, but there was nothing. Still, the sense of being watched deepened, like the cave itself breathed, alive with memories it refused to release. He tried to back away, but the ground trembled faintly, dust falling from the ceiling. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through his chest. Panic flickered, but curiosity rooted him in place. Then a voice, clear and cold as ice, echoed in his mind. "You've come." Garrett staggered, heart pounding. No one was there, just the cave and the whispers. Over the next days, the whispers followed him everywhere. At work, in his small cabin near the park entrance, in his dreams. They spoke of sorrow and betrayal, of promises broken and blood spilled. They told stories Garrett could barely grasp but felt in his bones. He began to dig into local history, old newspapers, and ranger logs. There had been disappearances along this stretch of the river, people vanishing without a trace, always near the cliffs. An old legend spoke of a cave cursed by a forgotten tribe, a place where spirits lingered, bound by ancient rites and unfinished business. Garrett's sleep grew restless, haunted by visions of pale faces, eyes like empty wells, mouths whispering secrets in the dark. His friends noticed changes, his quiet silences, the way he flinched at shadows. One night, driven by a compulsion he couldn't resist, he returned to the cave. This time he carried matches and a small journal to write whatever he might find. Inside, the whispers swirled like a living thing, urging him forward. As he moved deeper, the chamber seemed larger, stretching beyond reason, walls dripping with moisture and echoes. On the far side, he found a carved stone doorway hidden behind a curtain of roots. The symbols there matched the ones on the altar outside. With trembling hands, he pushed aside the roots and stepped through. Beyond was a narrow corridor lined with bones embedded in the walls like macabre mosaics. The whispers were deafening. Now a chorus of voices calling names, telling stories of betrayal and revenge. At the corridor's end was a room, illuminated by an unnatural faint glow. In the center stood a figure, tall, gaunt, with eyes that burned like embers. Its skin was pale, stretched tight over bones, and it wore tattered robes stained with earth and blood. "You've disturbed the rest," the figure said, voice like dry leaves. "But it's too late. The pact must be honored." Garrett felt a cold sweat break as the creature moved toward him. The whispers became screams, filling his head with agony and rage. He wanted to run, to scream, but his feet were rooted to the ground. The creature reached out, and the cave seemed to swallow the world whole. The night had a way of folding Palo Duro Canyon into shadows so deep they felt like a separate world. Ranger Joe Harlan knew those shadows well. 15 years of night patrols on these winding highways, watching the stars burn cold and distant above the red rock cliffs. He liked the quiet, the loneliness of the road after dark. It gave him time to think, to breathe. But that night was different. About 2 a.m, on a stretch of Highway 217 where the asphalt cut tight through the canyon walls, Joe saw her. A figure on the roadside, soaked through, standing beneath a flickering street lamp that barely pushed back the black. A young woman, arms folded tight against the cold, her hair plastered to her face like wet silk. He slowed his truck, engine low and steady, feeling that mix of caution and something else, curiosity maybe, that always crawled up his spine when he saw someone hitchhiking this late. She looked up as he rolled the window down, eyes wide, wet, but with a glint of something desperate. "Please," she said, voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. "Can you give me a ride?" Joe didn't hesitate. He unlocked the door and she slid in, the chill of her touch spreading cold through the cab. The radio crackled softly as they pulled onto the road, the canyon walls looming like silent giants. "Where to?" Joe asked, stealing a glance at her. She said nothing, just stared out the window, water dripping from the sleeves of her soaked jacket. The road stretched ahead, twisting through the shadows. Joe kept expecting her to say something, anything, but silence hung thick between them. As they neared the edge of the canyon, a patch of road where the streetlights died altogether, Joe glanced over again, and she was gone. No door opened, no window slid down, just empty seat, damp with rain, like she had never been there at all. His heart slammed against his ribs. He pulled over, searching the roadside, flashlight slicing through the dark. Nothing. No footprints, no sign. Back at the station, Joe's partner teased him. "You pick up a ghost now, Joe." He laughed it off, but sleep didn't come easy. The next night, same time, same stretch of road, she was there again, soaked and waiting, just like before. Joe stopped, same quiet desperation in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, climbing in like a shadow. This time he didn't say a word, just drove. The silence was heavier, filled with a sense of waiting, watching. When they reached the canyon's edge, she vanished again, gone like mist at sunrise. Joe's hands clenched the wheel, sweat slicking his palms despite the cold. Word got around, after that, other drivers seeing the soaked girl hitchhiking in the dead of night. Some said she'd ask for rides, only to disappear before reaching their destination. Others swore they heard crying, soft sobs that vanished with the wind. Joe began digging into the history of Palo Duro Canyon, hunting for answers. What he found was a story buried under layers of time and silence, a tale of a young woman named Clara May, who had disappeared on a stormy night decades ago. She'd been hitchhiking home from a dance, soaked to the bone when a car passed by. She was never seen again. Locals whispered that her spirit roamed the canyon roads, trapped between worlds, searching for a ride home she'd never get. As Joe's encounters with the phantom grew more frequent, the stories darker. The girl's appearances changed. She wasn't just wet anymore. Her face showed bruises, her eyes hollow pools of pain. Sometimes she begged him to stop. "Don't let him get me," before vanishing into thin air. One night, Joe followed her voice to the bottom of the canyon, where the river whispered over rocks and the wind carried voices not quite human. There, in the ruins of an old homestead, he found a battered car crushed beneath a fallen tree, rust eating away at the metal like time itself was trying to erase the memory. And he understood. Whatever haunted Palo Duro wasn't just a lost soul. It was something darker, a shadow born from violence and broken promises, bound to the canyon forever. Joe never stopped seeing her, the phantom hitchhiker of Palo Duro. And with every sighting, the darkness around the canyon grew heavier, thicker, as if the land itself was mourning something terrible, something Joe was now part of. Lost Maples. State Natural Area was one of those places that looked calm and peaceful during the day. The kind of place families came to picnic, hikers to wander, and photographers to catch the colors of the trees. Every fall, the maple trees lit up the hillsides with shades of red, orange, and gold so bright they almost glowed. But for the rangers who worked there, especially during the night shifts, Lost Maples was a different world. The forest didn't just feel quiet, it felt alive. Not in a good way. Cal Dixon had been a park ranger at Lost Maples for nearly 10 years. He knew the trails and the woods better than anyone, knew every hidden creek and every old tree. He was used to being alone in the dark, listening to the sounds of the forest, trusting his instincts. But in recent months, Cal started noticing things that made his skin crawl. It began with the carvings. One night, during a late patrol, Cal stopped near a group of tall maple trees. He shone his flashlight on a tree and froze. There, carved fresh, into the bark, was a symbol he hadn't seen before. It looked like a twisted shape, half circle, half jagged lines, that didn't make sense. He rubbed his fingers over the carving. The bark was rough and wet with sap. It wasn't there during his last patrol. He looked around and found more carvings on nearby trees. Different symbols, all strange, all new. Cal told his fellow rangers, but most of them just shrugged it off. Some thought it was pranksters or vandals, but others whispered about the trees watching, about hollow spaces in the trunks that seemed to move when no one was looking. A few even said the trees whispered at night. Cal wanted to believe it was just his imagination, but the feeling stayed with him. The trees felt like eyes watching from the dark. Curious and a little scared, Cal began to research the park's history. He dug into old records and talked to local historians. What he found was a story about the lost maples that no visitor would ever hear. A long time ago, before the park was a protected area, there was a small Native American tribe who lived in the canyon. They believed the forest was sacred, protected by spirits that lived inside the trees. They carved symbols into the bark to honor these spirits and keep them happy. Then settlers came, cutting down trees and claiming the land. The tribe vanished, but the spirits remained. The stories said the trees would punish anyone who disrespected the forest, marking them with strange carvings and watching them with eyes in the wood. Cal didn't know if he believed the story, but the next time he was on patrol, he carried an old notebook where he sketched the carvings and wrote down what he saw. One night, he followed a path into the deepest part of the forest, where the trees grew so close together that the moonlight barely touched the ground. The air was cold and thick, and the smell of wet earth filled his nose. Cal's flashlight beam danced over the tree trunks. Suddenly, he saw something move in the shadows. Just a flicker. He stopped, heart pounding. Then he noticed the carvings glowing faintly, like they had their own light. He stepped closer to one of the trees and saw that the hollow in the trunk wasn't empty. Inside was a dark space, but Cal thought he saw eyes looking back at him. Kulkain, hollow pulsed slightly like it was breathing. A low whisper brushed past his ears, soft but clear. "Leave." Cal's blood ran cold. He turned to run, but the forest seemed to close in around him. Branches reached out like fingers, scraping his jacket. The whispers grew louder, voices overlapping in a chorus of warning and anger. He stumbled, nearly falling, and when he looked back, the carvings on the trees were changing. They twisted and moved, forming faces filled with sorrow and rage. Cal didn't stop running until he burst out of the forest edge, gasping for air under the open sky. Back at the ranger station, Cal was shaken but determined. He knew the trees weren't just watching. They were alive in some way, connected to the old spirits, and they were angry. After that night, the carvings spread. Other rangers reported seeing new symbols. Some said the trees whispered their names, in the dark. A few rangers quit, refusing to go back into the forest after sunset. Cal stayed. He felt tied to the mystery, like he had to understand it, even if it scared him. He started carrying a small camera and a tape recorder, hoping to catch proof of the strange happenings. One night, while walking a trail, he stopped to record. The forest was still, but suddenly the tape hissed with static. Then a voice came through, soft, broken, begging. "Help! Lost!" Cal's flashlight caught movement ahead. He walked closer to a tree with a huge hollow at its base. The air grew colder, and the voice whispered again. Cal looked inside the hollow and saw a faint figure, something human-shaped, but made of shadows. The figure reached out, and Cal felt a cold grip in his chest, like the forest was trying to pull him in. He fought free, running until he could no longer hear the whispers. The next day, the carvings on the trees near where he'd been were new, symbols he had never seen before. They looked like warnings, or maybe a message. Cal realized the trees weren't just watching. They were guarding something ancient and dangerous, tied to the souls lost in the forest long ago. The Forest of Lost Maples wasn't just a place to visit in the fall. It was a living, breathing prison for old spirits. And anyone who stayed too long risked becoming part of it. Cal knew he couldn't leave. Not yet. Big Bend was supposed to be a place of silence and stone, of desert heat and endless skies. The mountains rose like giants, holding secrets older than any man could remember. But when the wildfire started, something in the desert changed. It wasn't like any fire the rangers had seen before. Cal Harris had been a ranger in Big Bend National Park for over 12 years. He knew every trail and every crevice of the Rocky Canyons. Wildfires were part of the land's cycle. They happened, they burned, and then they died. But this fire was different. It began one dry summer night with a lightning strike far off in the northern ridge. Rangers rushed to the site, expecting to find a typical brush fire. What they found was worse. The fire moved fast, faster than the wind or any spark should. Flames twisted and danced like they had a mind of their own. What made it worse was the way the fire spread, not just across the dry brush, but it jumped strangely from rock to rock, sometimes burning areas that looked wet or impossible to catch fire. Rangers who tried to fight the blaze vanished one by one. Their trucks were found abandoned on dusty trails, their radios silent. No one knew what happened to them. Cal was one of the last rangers left at the park station. The others had been pulled back for safety, but Cal refused to leave. He felt drawn to the fire, as if it was calling to him, whispering through the smoke. The first night he stayed behind, Cal sat in his truck watching the fire's orange glow on the horizon. The heat was intense, but the air smelled strange, not just of burning wood, but of something rotten and old, like the desert itself was sick. As he watched, the flames moved differently. Instead of racing straight through the brush, they curled back on themselves, wrapping around rocks and trees, like fingers. The fire seemed alive. Suddenly, a shape appeared in the flames, a tall figure, flickering like a ghost. Cal blinked, but it didn't disappear. The figure raised a hand, and the fire responded, roaring louder. Cal grabbed his radio, calling for backup. Nothing. Static. He tried again, but the only sound was the crackling fire and a whisper carried by the wind. The next day, Cal began to explore closer to the fire. The land was scorched black, but some patches of desert looked untouched, as if the flames had passed around them. In those places, he found strange marks burned into the rocks, symbols that looked like ancient writing, glowing faintly. That night, as he camped near the fire line, the whispers returned. They weren't words, but feelings. Anger, pain, hunger. Cal couldn't sleep. The fire wasn't just fire, it was something older, something angry. The next morning, Cal found footprints in the ash, human footprints leading into the burned forest. Following them, he came to a cave hidden behind a scorched cliff. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of smoke and earth. On the walls were more symbols, carved deep into the stone, glowing red. Cal's flashlight flickered as he stepped deeper inside. Then he heard it, a low humming, like a fire burning without wood or flame. The cave walls pulsed with heat, but no flames were visible. In the center of the cave was a small pit, glowing with orange light. Cal felt a terrible heat rise from it, burning not his skin but his soul. Then the voice came, deep and ancient. "You cannot put out what has always burned." Cal staggered back, heart racing. The fire wasn't natural. It was a spirit, trapped in the desert for centuries, fed by pain and rage. It burned because it had to, hungry for life and destruction. Cal realized the rangers hadn't vanished. They had been taken by the fire, consumed by the spirit to keep it alive. He had a choice: run and save himself, or face the fire and try to end the burning secret of Big Bend. Cal stayed. He gathered dry branches and rocks, building a barrier around the glowing pit. The fire roared in anger, flames licking at the cave entrance. Cal threw dirt and stones into the pit, trying to smother the ancient blaze. The fire fought back, twisting into shapes. Faces of the lost rangers, screaming and reaching for him. Cal felt their hands cold and burning at the same time, pulling him toward the pit. But he held on. Hours passed, the fire's fury growing and then, slowly, fading. The glow in the pit dimmed until it was just a cold, black hole. Exhausted and scorched, Cal stumbled out of the cave into the dawn. The wildfire outside was dying, shrinking back until it was nothing but smoke and ash. The desert was silent again. But Cal knew the fire wasn't gone. It was waiting, somewhere deep in the desert for the next time it could burn, and the secret of Big Ben's fire would never die. The wind always whispered secrets in Caprock Canyons, but sometimes in the dead of night, those whispers twisted into something else, something colder, darker. It was a sound no one could ignore once they heard it. The howl. Cal Dixon was no stranger to the canyon's wildness. He'd been a ranger here for nearly 10 years, his life wrapped in the dust and stones and vast blue skies of the Texas Panhandle. He knew the canyon like a well-worn book, every trail and hollow, every hidden cave. But the howl that started haunting his nights, that was a chapter he couldn't read. Not yet. It began one night in late September. The heat of the day had settled, leaving the air cool and still. Cal was driving the winding dirt road along the rim, checking on a group of campers when the howl sliced through the silence. Long, slow, and low, it rolled over the cliffs and seemed to shake the very rocks. He stopped his truck, heart tightening. He had heard wolves before. There were packs nearby, but this was different. It sounded wrong, like a voice that wasn't meant to be heard. Probably just a coyote, he told himself, but the unease didn't leave. The howl came again, a bit closer this time, stretching and bending like it was reaching out. It carried a pain that gnawed at something deep inside Cal, something older than fear. The next night, and the next, the howl returned. Campers complained about hearing it too, but no one had seen a wolf, and the rangers' trackers found nothing. The forest was silent, the usual signs of wildlife absent. The only thing out there was the howl. Cal started to lose sleep. He found himself walking the canyon's edge alone, trying to catch the source. His flashlight barely cut through the blackness, but he heard the howl again, low and mournful, like a cry for something lost. One evening, Cal's curiosity overcame caution. He strapped on his boots, grabbed his flashlight and knife, and followed the sound into the canyon. The path was steep and rough, the wind rising with a chill that felt unnatural. The night air smelled of dry earth and sage, and something else, something metallic and sharp. The howl pulled him deeper into the canyon, past familiar landmarks, and into a place even the old-timers called haunted. The walls of the canyon, closed in, red stone looming above, twisting and dark. He stopped at a small clearing where the howl seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. The silence that followed was thicker than the darkness. Then the ground trembled. From behind, a fallen boulder, Cal caught sight of a shape, not quite human, not quite wolf. It moved with a terrible grace, limbs bent at wrong angles, eyes glowing red in the dark. Its fur was patchy, revealing skin stretched tight over bones. Its mouth opened, emitting a silent scream that turned into the howl, long, lonesome, and full of rage. Cal's breath caught. He raised his flashlight, but the beam flickered and died, leaving him in blackness. He fumbled for his knife, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The creature stepped closer, and Cal saw it fully, a twisted mockery of life, with teeth sharp as razors and eyes that held centuries of pain. The howl filled Cal's mind now, a brutal sound that wasn't just noise but a force. It clawed at his thoughts, dragging up memories not his own. Lives lost, blood spilled, curses whispered under blood moons. Cal fought the voice inside his head, stumbling back toward the canyon wall. The creature lunged and then stopped. It tilted its head, studying him as if deciding something. Then, with a howl that shook the stones, it vanished into the night. Cal collapsed to the ground, shaking and gasping for air. In the days that followed, the howl returned, sometimes soft, sometimes a roar, but Cal never saw the creature again. The canyon felt alive with its presence, the shadows moving just beyond sight. He dug into the history of Caprock Canyons, reading old Native American legends about skinwalkers and cursed spirits that roamed the land, trapped between worlds. The locals whispered about a wolf spirit that howled for justice and revenge, caught in an eternal hunt. Cal knew the creature was real. It was waiting, watching, and one night it would call to him again. Because some howls don't fade away. They only get louder,